Welcome to Holding Down the Fort by U.S. VetWealth. I'm your host, Jen Amos, a Gold Star daughter, veteran spouse, and upcoming author. This season, we're helping seasoned spouses explore new opportunities and ideas outside the military so that they can make more confident choices for their next chapter. Why? Because you too are retiring, and now it's your turn. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back. If this is your first time here, I highly recommend you go back to our previous episode 231 with Candice Van Dertholen. That is part one of our conversation with her, in which we talk about what is energy work, why are we in the right time and generation to embrace it, and who can benefit. So once again, that is episode 231. That episode released last Thursday. So today is the final part two of our conversation with Candice. And we pick up our conversation at the end of the last episode where I asked Candice, how does one even begin energy work? So we'll get into that, as well as how stillness and slowing down can be considered taboo, at least in American culture, but the benefits of slowing down long enough to hear yourself and how that can ultimately change everything. Also in this conversation, Candice will share tips on how to build your nervous system relief over time, and how safety is the root of everything. Why building and taking the time to learn who you are is so important, because the hint is that learning who you are directs everything in your life. We'll also get into how energy work can serve you through military retirement, if that is what you and your family are going through right now. Candice will also share what it's like working with service members who are open to energy work. And then we get to a bunch of book recommendations and resources that will be provided for you in the show notes of this episode 232. And then in the end, Candice will share a full circle moment from when she first knew that she wanted to do energy work to where she's at today with her business. Candice, once again, it was a pleasure speaking with you. You know, I said this in the recording and I'll say it again. I'm still speechless. It was just such a pleasure to hear you speak, as well as re-listen to this for myself and, of course, for our listeners. So thank you again for the opportunity. And to our listeners, I hope that you enjoy the final part of our conversation. Happy listening. How do I even begin? Because I think, and I say that because sometimes I think that some of us can be in a season where subconsciously we kind of like the chaos, or maybe it's our normal. It's the devil we know. So Tell me about that initial process of here's how to do it. Here's the baby steps to make the time, and I'm here to help you.
Yeah, I think time is one of the biggest challenges for most people because we create let me just back up and say the awareness that stillness has never been taught to us, especially in America. I can't speak for other countries, but in America, stillness was taught as something that was bad or wrong, meaning if you were in trouble, you went to your room, you sat in isolation, you went to the corner, you put your head down. So we were not taught that stillness is acceptable and okay. So we have to start there with learning that it is safe and okay to be still or to be in stillness. Stillness also creates a lot of space for things to come forward that we're not working on. So that is reflected in unnecessary tasks or wasted time, is what I would say, on our calendar. The doom scrolling, the inability to pay attention, all of these different manifestations of our inability to want to sit still with ourselves. And it's not anything that's necessarily directly our fault. It's because we weren't taught that it was okay and safe. So I talk about safety a lot because it drives everything from our sleep to our relationships to our eating patterns. Like our safety is at the root of everything. So if we can learn how to feel safe in our body, we can change just about any habit that we have. And that's why building and taking the time to learn who you are is so important because it directs everything. And so getting started, it's a challenge for most people, but there is something about that first conversation that we have because I do an initial consultation and talk with people to make sure it's in alignment for both of us. And it's like they know that this is something that they have to do. It's no longer necessarily even a choice at that time. It is always a choice, but they're in this place of life where they're just exhausted. They're so tired of life just not working. And they've tried all the different things and they're just continuing to feel so run down, disconnected. And they're just like, is this really it? And so they've gotten to that place and they just want that change. And so I think part of it is, knowing that it's incremental. I never tell people like you need to go sit on the mountain for 12 days to reach this meditation high. You can, and it'll probably be beautiful. But no, not many people have that time. But if we can give you 5 minutes, can you give yourself 5 minutes to slow down before the end of the day or at the beginning of your day and make it accessible? I teach people different tools that they can integrate with. So, how do we continue to build that nervous system relief over time? And sometimes, I don't know if many people know this, but the reason why having safe spaces and communities are so valuable, it goes back to polyvagal theory and our need as a human to have co regulation. So, the ability to sit with one another in a completely safe space where I'm not putting a mask on. I don't have to pretend that I have all of my stuff together. You don't have to pretend either. We're just going to have open dialogue. And it doesn't mean it's always like, again, a therapy session. It's just that being your authentic self. And what that does is it opens up that reciprocal energy flow, which then allows the nervous system to calm down, which then allows clarity to come forward. That's why you can go and sit in this room of people that you enjoy being around and create change because you're calm enough, your nervous system is calm enough to receive the messages that you're trying to get. And so while it's definitely a person's choice to step into this work and to know that by honoring where they're at, it will take them so much further. It's still that choice and it's a process. It's something that you show up for. That's one of the things that I learned in 2024, oddly enough, is that, I was working with clients and I had worked with many clients, but I had never really offered them the opportunity to work with me for a little bit longer.
Mm.
And so I was even missing that element for like being a practitioner and getting to see the change. But what I have found is that by doing this work very intentionally, some people see me once a week, some people see me once every other week. And most of the time around the sixth session, we're really looking forward at, okay, where are you now and where can we go from here? Unless you're working on very specific business stuff, that sometimes takes a little bit longer because we're working on the different pillars there. But typically for the personal side of things, you start seeing transformation and change within those first couple of sessions. You'll notice that your sleep is better or you're having different conversations. Again, it goes back to slowing down long enough to hear yourself is truly what changes everything.
Yeah. I want to emphasize the word accessible. I love
Mhm.
that you let people know that you don't have to go to top of a mountain for, a couple of days to reach that meditative high. Or in my mind, I was thinking of those silent retreats. And I like this idea of, hey, it could be as simple as the time you take to brush your teeth or, drink water. I always start my day drinking water, and that time alone is like restorative. It awakens me before I even get to coffee. But just knowing that it doesn't have to be something over dramatic and epic. It could be very simple, very accessible. And so I bring this up because my show has really focused on our military spouses going through military retirement. And it's a huge shift. For a lot of these spouses, they have been, they've lived that military life for a couple of decades now. And everything is going to change in so many ways. And at least in my observation, a lot of their experience is having to get secondhand information or seek out things on their own. So I don't think it would be a surprise if they wanted to seek out something like this, like energy work. They just have to be aware of it, hence why we're having this conversation. So tell me a little bit about, your experience with the military and even just your own experience as a active duty military spouse going through transition soon, this year, I believe, and what you'd like to say to other military spouses who may be interested in energy work.
Yeah, I think to know that this work is safe. I think that there's a lot of misinformation about what this type of work is. And a lot of people have this idea that you have to have like a voodoo doll and crystals everywhere. Not saying that I don't. I definitely love, all things crystals. But I mean, there's a lot of misinformation about what this work is, and it really hinders us from ever stepping into the potential or possibility for that change. And because I work with so many people that are rebuilding their identity, because that is what transition and change is all about. It is one of the foundational elements that can truly unlock that identity. I know it did that for me and many of my clients. Like even this cohort that I've been running, if you check in on the comments on LinkedIn, these women are seeing change. And they are seeing change that they weren't anticipating to have, because in looking inward, they have been able to understand where their visibility issues are, where their confidence issues are, where they're disconnected from their physical body. And they weren't anticipating that. They're like, yeah, I knew it was going to come in and help grow my business, but wow, I didn't realize that this was going to literally change my life. And it's because when you're going through a transition, you are changing everything about what you know, everything about that energy signature, right? So if you're used to picking up and going after a couple of years, like we all are, you don't make as many deep connections. Well, then comes the question, well, will my community accept me? Will they accept me in this new role? And what happens after my role of military spouse ends, even if we're still considered a military spouse, it's not the same. And so, like, we're going through this transition now. And I mean, it's brought a lot of overwhelming greatness and like interesting connection points for me personally. As I didn't realize how much I wanted to be rooted. I love the change. I thrive off of change. Like my energy type is that. If you know anything about human design, like I love change. And so, thinking about being in the same place, I was like, oh, this is a big vision, like what if we pick the wrong place, Yet we have found home here and it's been so beautiful. I got to get together with a bunch of women on Monday, actually. And I created that event. I was like, you know what? I keep meeting all these amazing women. I'm going to invite them to come all together and just meet one another. And I know that I wouldn't have done that if I didn't know that we were not moving. And the reason being is because I've always had to say goodbye. And I get close enough to then be able to say goodbye, because that's the hardest part is like moving. You meet so many great people that you try your hardest to stay in touch with.
Yeah.
And I've actually stayed in touch with a lot of people, but I know that it has kept me from making that next layer of friendship with local community members. And so I think the encouragement is, if it aligns for you, step into this work. It is something that can be deeply transformative and heal so many years of not only personal lifetime experiences, but maybe there's generational patterning that you're holding on to. And there's so many great books out there if you're curious to really learn about what this actually is. So when I'm working with clients, I'm looking at the energy centers as a roadmap. And it helps me understand not only from my previous experience in psychology and early childhood development, where I took classes in that in college, also from the energy side of things. So, again, going back to the languaging and everything, but then, being able to walk people through that process of understanding what this all means. I don't just go in there and do the energy medicine and be like, okay, cool. See you next time. We're walking through, what is this doing for you? How is it feeling? And then the whole follow up process and write up through all of the conversation that we had, the key takeaways. And then here's a couple of practices that you can help yourself further this work. And it's not anything that takes you, some of it takes a little bit of time, depending on what you're working on, especially if we're working on your business, but it's all stuff that lays the foundation for that change. And, you know, I know that I've always been curious about this work, so it was a little bit easier for me to step in. But I grew up in a very religious household. And so I did not think that this work was safe for the longest time. And once I had my very first session, I just thought to myself, how come we're not talking about this? I know that if I feel this way, if I'm feeling this level of love and comfort and support that I never knew in my entire life existed, the world would change. Like, we wouldn't see the problems that we have. And I knew then, I knew that first session that I wanted to share this with the world because it has truly changed how I view myself and how I show up for others.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I just like hearing you talk, Candice. Just like
Oh,
taking everything you're sharing, and I love just even sharing your own thought process. And I hope that for anyone that is interested in energy work, they've gotten the language, to seek it out. I know that you also had worked with some service members, and I imagine it's a different approach to work with service members, let's say, versus military spouses. Maybe not, maybe so, but let me know. I know that one thing you had mentioned in working with them was that they were going through an identity shift. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because in the context of like military transition and military retirement, it's all about that identity shift. So what was it like working with those service members?
yeah. So working with service members, the main difference is that community sense or sense of community being gone. The civilian world is very different in how they function and operate in the work setting. And then where do you find friends? Because, adulting, like even everyday people, like I had somebody ask me just yesterday, how do you find friends as adults? And I was like, well, yeah. So it's like we find it through common shared interests, but you have to be willing to look for it, right? But a book that I really appreciated, and I hope that anybody that's going through a transition from the military can read or listen to, is On Assimilation by, the last name is Jenkins. I think it's Jenkins, but I know his last name is Jenkins. Anyway, and he was special forces, and he talks about the emotional challenges of coming out of the military. And that's the biggest thing is, when your whole identity has been shaped around a system, it's really hard to know who you are underneath that because you've been taught not to be.
Yeah.
And so I work with several service members who are, again, they're all open to this kind of work now. And that's the helpful part. And a lot of it is about letting them find who they are underneath the uniform. And because once you hang that uniform up, there's a part of grief that we don't talk about because it depends on how long you've been in, but most that are going through the challenge of it have been in long enough to build that connection point because it is directly tied with your identity and you've been ingrained that. And so the biggest questions that we work through are not only just honoring who they were in the military, it's a part of them, but then what about this next period of life are you looking forward to? And what would that sense of peace and flow and connection look like? And what's the legacy that you want to live going forward? And sometimes we don't have those answers right on the first session. That's not what we're trying to do. we're really trying to heal through the experiences that are keeping you from knowing what that is. And sometimes it's military experience that we're healing from, sometimes it's even further back. So they're human at the end of the day too, and they carry a lot of the past wounding a lot deeper. And I can say that the willingness to do the internal work will keep you from struggling. I think I mentioned in the first podcast that I had a previous spouse who wasn't a service member, but he was a paramedic and firefighter, and he struggled until his last day with PTSD. And so I'm a huge advocate for mental health awareness, but also taking the time to acknowledge when you're going through a struggle or a hard time, because there are so many resources, even if we have to look for them. And I get that that should be so much easier, I know. But there are so many different ways to get that same opportunity. Now, I will share that some practices that I encourage people, I encourage everyone to check into. There's a great book called Your Brain on Art. It is phenomenal. It talks about the neuroscience and the correlation between healing through the arts. So whether that's, drawing, singing, dancing, improv, you name it. Like, she doesn't leave anyone unturned. But there's so much scientific data that supports the creativity side of healing. So sometimes when we can't vocalize what we're going through in our experience because it's just too hard, you can creatively express through different mediums like drawing or painting or journaling, writing. And so I encourage people to explore that if they have a challenge connecting with people or talking about their experience. There's other practices like sound healing that can be so helpful. Sound healing, the way it works is every single vibration that exists on the planet is a frequency. And sound healing helps your body recalibrate to that frequency of sound, which then puts you into different brain waves, which then puts you into the rest and digest, which takes you out of that reactive state of living. And so, again, some of these little practices that if we just know that they're available and it doesn't have to cost anything. I mean, half of the time there's tons of music out there on YouTube or different meditation apps. I'll have to look up Spiritune. They offer something special for the military. So, again, it goes back to we have so many different ways to support ourselves. We just have to be willing to step into them.
Yeah, absolutely. Just having that willingness, the openness, and knowing that there are safe environments and people such as yourself that provide that safe space to, explore energy work. Well, Candice, I know that we have to wrap up here in a quick second, but I'd love for you to wrap up in sharing a full circle moment you recently had. And this is just to give people a little snippet into how you've grown as an entrepreneur and in your business. So tell us a story about the last time you were running in DC, and we'll wrap up with this story.
Yeah, so when I was in DC, I was at a speaking engagement and I was just taking in the moment. I was staying at a friend's house, but she lived in the same neighborhood that my husband and I were in. And before we had left, I had asked about if I needed to become a master in master Reiki level. Oh my goodness. And my sign that I'm on the path and I'm in alignment have been deer, notoriously the deer. And so before we had left, I saw a deer literally the day that we were leaving. And I had asked for it, and they hadn't been out all season that we had seen. And we went, and it was right at the beginning of the path. And I just took that moment in, and I was like, wow. So fast forward to the last time I was in DC, which was the time before last, actually was in November. But I was on this run and I was like, it would be really fun to just see the deer just because, I'm doing the run. It's my last day here and, just thinking through it all. And out of nowhere, I saw three crossing my path. Well, at the time, I had been thinking about the three big pillars of my business, which at the time were the private clients, the retreats, and the cohort. And it was just like so divine alignment to see all three of them cross in the same path. And I didn't even think about it until later that it were the three pillars. It hit me a little bit later, but I was running and I was guided to stop and walk, and that's when they passed. So when I was embracing stillness and doing outside of what I wanted to do, which was just keep running, but I had wanted and had the desire to see the deer, and something in me, my intuition said, if you want to see them, you have to slow down. And so it was just that confirmation. And then as I was coming back up, one of them crossed back over the path and walked right alongside me in the little thicket. And I took a video because it was just staring right at me. And I felt like it was like, you've got this. You're doing this. And it just such a beautiful full circle moment because my business started in that area. And, I had a pretty thriving practice at the time. And then we moved to California, and it was like I went from having like 20 clients to no clients. And it was a big transition. I had to go through what every entrepreneur I think goes through is that moment of truth of, can I make this work? And what do I need to do differently? And so it's been a full circle experience in that not only have I grown as a practitioner, but I've been able to fully see what I'm here to do. To think that I launched my first cohort in January and had 40 women join. That's mind blowing. Have this mastermind coming up, and I've already got people committing. It's just when you're in alignment and you follow your path, opportunities and doors open if you're willing to see it through. I mean, I remember, questioning and crying so many times, like, am I meant to do this? Like, do you want me to do this, universe? Like, is this really what, like, I can go get a job and all the things, but it just took me slowing down long enough to just see where I needed to pivot. And the funny part is that I wasn't doing anything for my business that I knew to do. I had all this background in business development, helping these businesses grow and launch and, launch the yoga studio with 450 members. Like, I know the things to do. I wasn't doing it for myself. And that's a whole conversation that I have with entrepreneurs because it's something we all do. But the full circle part is just like seeing it grow and being able to say, like, I have a sustainable business now, and that's something that I had hoped for back then. So it's very, very beautiful.
Yes, and it's just very beautiful to hear, Candice. I really don't have anything else to add. I've just been taken in your entire story and journey and everything you shared today. So I don't even want to try to top off anything you said or try to summarize because everything you said was just so beautifully eloquent. So with that said, Candice, thank you. It's so great to have you back on the show. And I imagine that our listeners will get a lot of value in what you had to share today. So thank you again.
Well, thank you for having me. I totally appreciate it.
All right, there you have it, y'all. For this recording, it just felt right to dive straight into the final part of our conversation, and I'm glad I sure did, and I hope that you felt the same way. I'll wrap up just by reiterating one of the things that she said toward the end, which is we have so many different ways to support ourselves. We just have to be willing to step into them. And so I hope that this conversation today helped you see what else is out there in the military, and hopefully it makes you feel safe and excited to explore other opportunities that could be helpful for you and your family, and in this case, energy work. So thank you so much, Candice. Thank you so much for listening. Again, you can check out the resources mentioned in our conversation in the show notes of our episode. Simply visit insidethefort.com. Again, that's insidethefort.com, episode 232. Thanks for listening. Chat soon. Hey, thanks for listening. If you're seeking a second opinion on the Survivor Benefit Plan, subscribe to our podcast now at insidethefort.com. That's insidethefort.com. Once you subscribe, you will receive a free download to the introduction of my book, The Military Spouse Benefit Plan. Why? Because you've spent years holding it down for your family, and we are dedicated to helping you own what's next. See you on the inside at insidethefort.com or we'll catch you in the next episode. Bye for now.